So welcome back. Now for today's video, I wanted to talk to you about how you can get better photos using your DJI Mavic Mini Mark 1. So let's talk about it.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. Liftoff. We have a liftoff. 32 minutes.
So yes, I'm aware that the Mavic Mini 2 is on the market and it has more flexible options for photos such as RAW, panoramas, in-app enhancing, but I want to discuss the OG Mini here because it's a very popular and very practical drone at its price point. We will be going over the Mavic Mini 2 when mine comes in tomorrow. I feel as though the DJI Mavic Mini Mosquito Mark 1 gets widely overlooked for its photography features or lack thereof. Fair enough. The drone merely has a 12 megapixel sensor with the fixed 24mm focal length and an f2.8 aperture, and a 1/2 inch sensor. And on top of that, it cannot shoot RAW or DNG format, so you're stuck with JPEGs. That said, I still think it's a great choice, if not one of the best options on the market for its size and price for aerial photography. Now here's why. First, sure, it's only 12 megapixels, but that's plenty for social media and just fine for prints. No pun intended, well maybe a pun intended. The JPEGs are mildly bendable in post-production if one wishes, so long as they take proper exposure in shot rather than try to scrape together any lost information in post-production, but I'll touch on that in the tips part very shortly. That fixed f2.8 aperture on this 1/2 inch sensor and 24mm lens doesn't allow for much background separation for those creamy bokeh shots or portrait stuff, but one generally won't use a drone for such work, but it'll be fine for what the drone is made for, i.e. landscapes. Again, a Gaussian blur could be added post-production if one wishes, but I don't want to get into that as I want to focus on what to do in shot rather than in post. My third reason why this is one of the best options for drone photography at this price point is you have a 3-axis mechanical gimbal for improved stability with a much larger sensor than a large portion of smartphones on the market, and you can set it in the sky and have some manual controls to work with. After all, the worst shot's the one you miss, right? That said, here's some of my tips on how to grab better images with this little fly cam. Firstly, expose correctly. The Mavic Mini is easy to monitor proper exposure before taking a shot, and it has many useful tools in its wheelhouse to help. So from the jump, the drone had manual options for photos from exposure comp for either lowering a few stops while exposing for the sky or nice silhouette style shots, or you can bump it up to get more information on ground level stuff if it's a nice bright sunny day. But my favorite tool here is the histogram, which I've went over in a few other videos, especially since the Mavic Mini does not have RAW or DNG modes at this time. But even so, it's still good practice to expose correctly so one doesn't have to try to squeeze out all of that lost information post-production, which probably won't be there anyways. The histogram can be found under the menus here in the DJI app and plopped anywhere on the screen where it doesn't bother you. One tip I would say with the histo is to make sure your lumps are not showing any drastic spikes on the right, the highlights, or the left, the shadows. Now, it's fine if you're doing this with intent, such as straight blacks for silhouette shots or straight whites for those dreamy looking heavenly shots, but for about everything else, try to avoid those spikes so you have more information and dynamic range in the picture. The second tip is to slow down that shutter. To backpack on exposing using manual controls, slow down that shutter and don't bump that ISO unless you absolutely need to. I think the Mavic Mini is fine up until ISO 800 in my humble opinion, but I keep it closer to its base ISO whenever possible. On top of that, slowing down the shutter speed allows for more light to hit this tiny sensor in low light shots, and it could add a nice sense of motion when you're working with fast moving subjects like a waterfall or traffic, but do not fly your drone near traffic because of laws and stuff, obviously. Slowing down that shutter speed has some great benefits, especially with a little drone like this, since you can't naturally blow out your background with bokeh. Instead, you can use that constant whole scene focus to your advantage. Fly the drone in tandem with the subject and get that sense of motion while still keeping the subject in frame and sharp. Well, what if it's bright out? Well, if this is the case, I'd pick up some ND filters to add some sunglasses to that little mechanical eye and slow down the shutter. Now, this third tip transcends any kind of photography. Get closer. Some shots take themselves, especially aerial shots, landscapes, fall colors, golden hour, you name it. However, one gets closer to the subjects and they pinch them in the intersecting lines of the rule of thirds grid. It'll add a focus point, interest, and intimacy to the viewer. The human eye needs something to focus on or something to follow. Adding a focus point will always help. Now get closer when you can and don't try unless you have permission. Do not fly this drone into traffic or your neighbor's window and get tossed in the can for being a weirdo. However, do this for more interesting shots if permissible. Just try to change up your perspective a bit. So a quick wrap up. First, expose correctly using the wheelhouse of tools the Mavic Mini has. Slow down the shutter speed to add a sense of motion or to add motion blur to your shots. And simply get closer to tighten up a loose composition. Use ND filters when you can if it's too bright or you want to slow down the shutter, but honestly that's all I have for you, so I hope this helps. I'll have a couple more Mavic Mini 1 videos to come, but sounds like the Mavic Mini 2 is the next big thing, so we're going to focus on that for a little bit since that's coming in the mail tomorrow for me. Regardless, thank you for watching, and check out Matt's notes on Instagram for content seen here, or Trappy Chan for fun stuff. Until next time, thanks for watching.